"What do you want?" They responded, "Where are you staying?" Jesus said, "Come and see." What an odd conversation. What a strange way for John to introduce us to the Word, the light, the Lord, the Lamb of God made flesh. "What do you want?" Jesus asks. "Where are you staying?" They respond. Jesus says, "Come and see." We know that questions are rarely mere inquiries for information. Questions exist in a social context, and they carry a kind of weight with them. Upon being introduced to someone, we ask, "Where are you from?" Whether the answer is Seattle or South Sudan, we believe we've learned something about this person's identity. By knowing where they're from, we know a piece of who they are. We ask in introductory small talk, "What do you do?" Anyone who has ever been unemployed knows that the answer to this question matters, knows that the answer will be taken as a reflection of identity. The phrasing of the response is often explicitly tied to identity. I say, "I am a student," rather than, "For a few hours a day and many days of the week, I can be found in a classroom setting." Attaching our identity to our work often suits our desires, giving us an opportunity to tell the way that we understand ourselves to someone else. And receiving such responses also suits us well. It allows us to place our associations of this field of work upon an individual, to know something of their daily life, gives us some clues as to the way that we interact with them. Two men approach Jesus, and he says to them, "What do you want?" And they ask him, "Where are you staying?" It matters how the question is answered. Some of you know that I recently moved. The way I described the location of my previous home was that I lived on the Queen Anne side of the Fremont Bridge. And I knew exactly what I was doing with that answer, knew just what I was trying to convey. I'm cool and creative enough to like Fremont and want to be near to it, but I'm also adult and established enough to live on Queen Anne Hill. My new home is just as cumbersome to describe. I say, I live in Discovery Park. I emphasize it like that. I don't just want to say that I live in Magnolia. There have certain connotations about stage of life that I'm just not ready for. So I say I live in Discovery Park. If someone's familiar with it, I explain the old military housing just recently became available for public rent. And I know my social status, sky high. I'm the first edge of something. There's a uniqueness to it, and also has the historical vintage component. I get to claim both woods life and city life with one address and one answer to a weighty question. "Where are you staying?" asked the men. And Jesus, of course, doesn't do any of the verbal sidestepping that you or I do when faced with such a question. He doesn't say, "Oh, I've got this awesome penthouse right by the River Jordan." He doesn't claim any cool status. Jesus also doesn't respond as we might think Jesus would. "Oh, I'm not staying anywhere. I'm free from all luxury and desire." What really strikes me is that when meeting two strangers, he doesn't hold them at a distance. I might hesitate to give out my address to some guys who are just following me around. And Jesus does the opposite when confronted with the question, "Where are you staying?" No, Jesus doesn't answer the ways that we might. Instead, Jesus does something more vulnerable, more humble, more invitational. He responds, "Come and see." Rather than describing the place for the disciples and then forming the way they understand him, he instead invites them into his life to observe, to experience, and to draw their own conclusions. As I think about this moment, when two men in our gospel story heard the invitation, I try to imagine, what is it that they felt? They just asked a question, attempting to get a feel for who Jesus is. This man they've heard said is the Lamb of God, but they don't know him. And instead of getting this safe, standard, neatly packaged answer that they know what to do with, they get an invitation into something new and unfamiliar, something unknown. He asks them to follow him. They don't know where. He asks them to follow without knowledge of any details of what they'll find or discuss or do. He asks them to take a risk, to be vulnerable, to take a step towards him. As I think of it, our own lives are full of invitations just like this. Invitations in which we're not given many details up front. Invitations that ask us to risk, to be vulnerable, to confront our fears. Some of these invitations are vocational. Enrolling in a school, accepting a promotion or a shift in work responsibilities. Some are relational, an invitation to coffee, a first date, a marriage proposal, a pregnancy, or the news that a relationship we had relied on is different than we had thought. These invitations can be geographic, moving houses, countries, cultures, or when someone that we love moves away. Whatever the content of the invitation, in all invitations we are asked to inhabit the uncertainty, even as we come and see what's next. Our time of transition in this parish is also an invitation, an opportunity for us to risk saying yes. As Mother Melissa moves into her call to become bishop, we are first invited to grieve the loss of her presence here with us. We're invited to risk being vulnerable as we go through this transition, to confront our fears of an uncertain future. And on the other side of this yes, we as a parish are offered an opportunity to risk saying yes to whatever might be next. We're invited to come and see what opportunities might await us as we discover them, without much certainty of what will be. In our gospel reading today, I find offered one piece of certainty, the extension of one reassurance in the middle of the anxiety and paralysis that can accompany such invitations. Our gospel offers us the comfort that a thread of holy companionship and connection is guiding us. It is Jesus himself, God made flesh, who walks before and with the men in our gospel story. Jesus, who guides them to an unfamiliar place and an unfamiliar way of being, guiding them to a place that Jesus knows intimately. It is Jesus, we can imagine, who extends his hand toward them, his gesture both inviting and emboldening them to follow, rather than drawing back or running away. It is Jesus himself whose very way of relationship with the world and with others is the thing they will see once they arrive at where he stays. And so, when you or I stand at the threshold of what just might be an invitation full of promise, even as it provokes our hesitations and fears, we can know we are not alone. Beside us, with full knowledge of what is ahead of us, and to empower us to accept the invitation to our own lives again and again. So come and see. The Holy One of God is inviting you. The Holy One of God is beckoning to you. The Holy One of God is beside you. Come and see.